When territory wrestling reigned supreme, there were a lot of promotions that left their mark. But one that seems to get lost in the Portlands, Carolinas, and Dallases is a promotion that ran in Knoxville, Alabama, and the Gulf Coast between the mid-1970s and the late 1980s. It may not be remembered much today, but for a time it was one of the hottest territories in the country that slowly fell apart trying to survive in an industry that was changing forever. This is Defunct Championship Wrestling, episode 29, the story of the Fullers, the Knoxville 5, and Southeastern Championship Wrestling. In 1974, Ron Fuller purchased the Knoxville wrestling territory from John Canzana. At the time, this wasn't some major territory. It was a promotion rooted in small to mid-sized southern towns, running weekly cards in buildings that held a few thousand people at most. But what Fuller did have was something far more important than massive venues or television on a superstation. He had family. The Fuller and Welch families had one of the most dominant dynasties in professional wrestling. It's far too large to fully cover here, but just to summarize, during the heyday of the territory system, their families controlled this whole region of the country. By the mid-1970s, brothers Ron and Robert Fuller were running Southeastern Championship Wrestling out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Both men were excellent wrestlers, perfect for the gritty southern wrestling style of the era. But just as important, they were phenomenal talkers. In a time when you really had to talk people into the building, there were few as good at it as Ron and Robert Fuller.
I'm coming to one place only, Birmingham, and that's on Thursday night, November the 13th, when all you people out there in television land, that's right, you grandpa and grandma and all the little kids, drag them back from the TV so you can get a good look at a real man. I'm going to be in your city, live and in living color. You're going to have the opportunity to see the greatest wrestler that has ever lived, and certainly the greatest that has ever come to the state of Alabama. The Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Don't forget that name. And you mentioned there's going to be a lot of people in the tournament. Well, I hope so, because I love competition. I love to whip people.
Let's talk about a little bit of your competition. Let's talk about Bob Armstrong.
I guess you thought I was through. I love whipping people.
Nearly 20 years later, Robert Fuller would become a household name as Colonel Robert Parker in WCW. He also had a great run in NAWA, which I covered back in Defunct Championship Wrestling episode 22. But in the late 70s, it was Ron Fuller who was considered the more successful, and more business savvy of the two. Ron Fuller was only 26 when he started promoting, by the way. That just blows my mind to have that kind of responsibility and knowledge so young. Around 1977, Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling, based out of Pensacola, Florida, was on its last legs. The Fullers either purchased the territory or received permission from their cousins, Lee and Bobby Fields, to take it over. Instead of merging everything together, the Fullers ran the areas as two separate promotions. Knoxville had its own TV, Florida and Alabama had their own TV. There were different rosters, different commentary teams, different touring loops. One crew worked Tennessee, the other worked Northern Florida and Alabama. As you can probably guess by this point, for the Fullers, this wasn't just business, it was family business. The Fullers were extremely cautious about who they allowed to buy into the territory. They didn't want just some money guy, they wanted people they trusted. And most of the time that meant other members of the Fuller or Welch families. But there were a few exceptions, one of them being Bullet Bob Armstrong. In the late 1970s, the Fullers offered Bob Armstrong the chance to buy into the territory, and he jumped at it. Armstrong purchased a 10% stake and became one of the key pillars of Southeastern wrestling. Not just as an owner, but also as a top star. Scott Armstrong has said that growing up he thought of the Fullers as uncles. That's how close they were. After the merger with Gulf Coast, Southeastern's biggest cities became Knoxville, Birmingham, and Pensacola. These weren't massive arenas, usually around 5,000 seats, but more often than not, they were sold out. As Rip Rogers once said, "At that time, what else is there to do in Dothan, Alabama on a Saturday night? Wrestling was the show." The roster during this period was stacked with future stars: Austin Idol, Kevin Sullivan, Paul Orndorff, Michael Hayes, and Hulk Hogan.
Here you see the eighth wonder of the world, Andre the Giant, and Terry the Hulk Boulder. Dickie Steinborn in to instruct the gentleman on the rules of this arm wrestling match. It's back and forth, even match. Billy Spears.
Andre goes after Spears. Oh, he just hit Andre with the table.
At the top of the cards were the Fullers, Bob Armstrong, the Mongolian Stomper, and their other cousin Jimmy Golden, all multiple-time Southeastern heavyweight champions. And then business in Alabama exploded. By spring 1979, Southeastern Championship Wrestling was taping TV in Dothan, Alabama, and selling out the Houston County Farm Center every Saturday night. This was the exact kind of building WWE documentaries later claimed Vince McMahon saved wrestling from. It was hot, it was smoke-filled, it had red clay floors. But here's what you won't hear about. The Farm Center held around 6,000 fans, and some nights hundreds were turned away.
Dothan had a magic about it.
It was an extremely enthusiastic fan base. You could tell that this was a great wrestling city. It wasn't uncommon to wrestle 8 days a week.
Birmingham on Monday, Mobile on Tuesday,
Wednesday in Montgomery.
Thursday nights, Panama City, Friday night, Meridian, Mississippi, then Saturday night was Dothan.
Sunday we would wrestle in Pensacola.
You didn't let the fans down because the fans were the most important aspect of the business, and the guys knew that.
Southeastern was also considered one of the best paying territories in the business. With a smaller roster and shorter cards, even opening match guys might make $600, while main eventers pulled in $1,200. There just wasn't a massive pay gap that you might see in other territories at the time. And on top of that, the boys got to go to the beach on off days. Most of the roster loved it, but not everyone. One man in particular believed something was off: Bob Roop. At the time, top wrestlers were paid a percentage based on the house drawn. More fans in attendance, the more the top guy would get paid. And Roop believed the numbers weren't adding up. One night in Knoxville, Roop watched the ticket takers, according to him a mother-daughter team that allegedly was only counting about 2/3 of tickets. Packed house, every seat was filled, but the payoffs told a different story. Roop confronted Ron Fuller. Fuller denied everything. That response was a massive red flag to Roop. Because if nothing was happening and nobody was skimming off the house, why wouldn't he at least look into it? Roop wasn't alone. Bob Orton Jr., Boris Malenko, and Ronnie Garvin regularly gathered at Roop's apartment, knocking back some beers and talking business. None of them were happy. Eventually, Roop floated an idea. What if they just took the territory? Roop had allegedly been given the booking job for Southeastern. That bit of authority made a takeover theoretically possible. It wasn't even a new idea for Roop. He tried something similar in San Francisco with Roy Shire. The coup ultimately failed, but Roop wanted to give it another shot. Around this time, Dick Slater was staying with Roop while he was recovering from a leg injury. Depending on who you believe, Slater either warned promoter Eddie Graham, who passed word around to Fuller, or Slater simply declined to join the plan. Either way, Ron Fuller found out. When confronted, Roop fell on the sword. He resigned as booker and then gave his notice, protecting the other guys. On June 1st, 1979, Roop, Orton, and Malenko all lost their matches. Ronnie Garvin would win the Knoxville version of the Southeastern Heavyweight Championship. And the next night, they just no-showed TV. They had the belt, and in that era, championships for a territory meant something. Together, the group formed an outlaw promotion, International Wrestling Association, also known as All-Star Wrestling. Knoxville legend Ron Wright joined them, giving the group local credibility. Wright's issues seemed to revolve around him selling the Fullers a 49% stake in the towns that he was promoting, and also selling them his TV slot in Kingsport, Tennessee. According to Wright, once the Fullers grew and expanded, they stopped paying him for the rights to those towns and the TV, so he left. Wright had also claimed to have been the force behind the walkout. You may remember a much older Ron Wright from my Smoky Mountain video. I didn't really know much about him at the time, but I've come to learn that Wright was one of the nastiest heels in Tennessee history. So hated that he was once stabbed in Greenville, Tennessee and needed 190 stitches. Garvin showed up on Wright's TV with the Southeastern title. Thankfully, he didn't throw it in the garbage. According to Garvin, Fuller tried to sue him to get the belt back, claiming it as personal property. Fuller provided proof of sale and everything else, but then Garvin was cross-examined. When asked how championship titles in wrestling worked, Garvin stated it was his understanding that while he was champion, the physical belt was his property, until he lost the title in a match or refused to face a legitimate challenger, neither of which had happened. Garvin claims that the only way Fuller could have won the case would be to break kayfabe in court under oath and state that the champion was picked by promoters in predetermined matches. Fuller didn't do it. There's no known court record of the suit, but Garvin eventually sold the belt to a private collector in 2005. To defend their partner territory, the NWA promoters circled the wagons around Knoxville, with Jim Barnett, Jim Crockett, and Eddie Graham all sending talents to Knoxville to work for Fuller or running spot shows themselves to counter-program the IWA crew. The Outlaw group lasted less than 6 months. Roop reportedly lost $200,000. There was a last-ditch effort to take over the territory with another Outlaw promotion that had been trying to break into Tennessee, Angelo Paffo's ICW. Orton, Garvin, Roop, and Malenko were given small percentages of ownership in the promotion, and they would bring Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo onto the All-Star Wrestling show, which I believe ICW took over. The All-Star Wrestling show is probably the worst looking and worst produced wrestling show I've ever seen. The ring is bad, the lighting is awful. It looks like they filmed it in Ron Wright's garage. I've actually seen better looking wrestling shot in a garage. And when they want to advertise an upcoming card, they literally just hold up the event poster and read it off of that. It's terrible. It looks like a show that was just thrown together on the cheap just to get a wrestling show on the air. But before it collapsed, the 5 men created something that would become wrestling legend, the Plan B tape. According to Roop, Ron Wright came up with an idea to expose the business as a form of blackmail. If the NWA promoters wouldn't let them run Knoxville, they'd go public about what wrestling really is. Plan A was simply compete with Fuller and maybe put him out of business. Plan B was to kill the industry. It was a nuclear option. On the tape, Bob Roop hosts as all 5 men admit that they've never had a real wrestling match. They explain characters, gimmicks, and even show Boris Malenko transforming into the Great Malenko.
And my trademark, through the years, people that have been watching wrestling, people that have followed wrestling, have known me as a person that stands in that camera each week with his eye cocked like this. And this is my shtick, this is my gimmick. I would say something in reference to this. My voice would change. I would accumulate an accent as I'm talking to you here and now. I am 230 pounds of mind and muscular coordination that is unbeatable. This is something that I am an expertise at. But as well as the light side, I would like to show you something else, or tell you something. I have never had, in all the 27 years of being a professional wrestling, what you call a real wrestling match.
At the end of the tape, Roop hints that there will be other installments going into all the dirty details of the pro wrestling business.
What you're seeing is historic in a sense because of the fact that nobody's ever had the courage and in a sense the dignity to come out here and say the things they've been saying. We've all been conditioned to protect the wrestling industry because it is big business. It's $1 billion business. They only report about 330 million of it a year. 3rd largest spectator sport. But it is big business and we've been conditioned to protect it, even though it is a fraud. Well, this is just the outline. This is the first part of a mini-series that we have planned. And in later segments, we're going to talk about, the second question I was ever asked after Is Wrestling Fake was, where does the blood come from? We're going to do a whole segment on where does the blood come from. We're going to show you exactly where it comes from.
No other tapes were ever recorded. Now, how this would air, I don't know. It's clearly set up for the general public, for non-wrestling fans. So maybe they were going to air it on a local news broadcast? Not really sure. Bob Roop has even admitted that they never thought that far ahead. The tape never saw the light of day, instead it supposedly was passed around those in the business for decades, until finally ending up online just a couple years ago. Ron Fuller believes they realized something simple. Wrestling was still how they made a living. Blowing it up would have destroyed their futures as well. With the tape never going public, all of the Knoxville 5 were able to move through the business unscathed. Bob Orton would go on to become a major star of the rock and wrestling era. Ronnie Garvin became the NWA World Champion. Ron Wright maintained his status as a legend in Tennessee. Boris Malenko worked a couple more years until retiring and becoming one of the best wrestling trainers in history, and Bob Roop continued to work throughout the territories until retiring in 1986. All 5 men went on to varying degrees of success, but wrestling in Knoxville almost died completely. Starting in October of 1980, Jim Crockett Jr., Blackjack Mulligan, and Ric Flair all took turns as the majority owners of the Knoxville territory. The Fullers were no longer their own bosses. During this period, the promotion became an afterthought. However, it would see big names like Mr. Wrestling 2 and Arn Anderson pass through. They also did produce some interesting stories, like the Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy feud from the summer of 1982.
There is a man walking around here in the southeastern area, a man that I traveled up and down the roads with for 4 long years, a man that I fought with side by side, shed blood with, shed sweat with, showed my house with this man.
Mr. Gordy?
Yeah, let me tell you something, man. Hey, it's a conspiracy is what it is. Let me tell you something, Michael Hayes. The best thing for you to do, boy, is stay out of my way, because I come here to make a name for myself, and I come here to collect titles like I'm going to do. And like I said, Michael Hayes, this might be your hometown and everything, boy, but you best stay out of my way.
Cherry Gordy, very upset about that piece of video.
By 1985, Ron Fuller regained control and tried to start fresh. Fuller wanted to put the promotion in a position to try and compete with the new top dog in the business, Vince McMahon and the WWF. To accomplish that goal, some changes needed to be made. A new name, Continental Championship Wrestling, trying to move away from the much more regional-sounding Southeastern. They also changed their TV presentation, leaving the TV studio and instead taping TV at the Birmingham Fairgrounds. The show maintained a studio wrestling format, it's just in a bigger building. And new stars, including Tom Pritchard, exotic Adrian Street, Tony Anthony, and the Midnight Rockers Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty would also come in 1987 after their initial WWF firing. With Vince expanding and eating up the territories, Ron Fuller and Continental fought back. One weekend in September of 1987, WWF was sent to run Nashville the same night that the Fullers were running Chattanooga, so Continental scheduled their yearly 2-ring battle royal for that night. In years past, they would increase the ticket price for the show, but this year they actually lowered the ticket price, and it worked. They sold out the Memorial Auditorium in Chattanooga and supposedly outdrew the WWF show. Around this time, there was also allegedly talks with CBS to bring Continental to national television. The network was supposedly impressed with the upgraded presentation of the show, but Ron Fuller just didn't think they were there yet. Over the next few years, the Fullers did right the ship a bit, but it was still a struggle to elevate new stars and turn a profit. There were some bright spots like the start of the Tom Pritchard and Tony Anthony feud. This 85-86 period of Continental is super fun, I really enjoy it. It has some very good wrestling, there's tar and feathering, bounties, head shavings, it's fantastic. But the magic was fading. Gordon Solie, as the face of the TV show, received several letters from people who complained about the lack of live cards and the short duration of the matches. He had concerns about the longevity of the promotion, but continued to fly to Birmingham on Mondays for TV. In the spring of 1988, the Fullers sold the rights to Continental Wrestling and the Alabama and Florida portion of the territory to local television station owner David Woods. The sale would also see another name change to try to make the promotion appeal to a wider audience, when it became the Continental Wrestling Federation. To try to compete with the WWF further, Woods landed CWF a TV deal with the Financial News Network. With a new owner, new name, and a new TV show, the promotion also needed a new booker. Legend has it that Eddie Gilbert saw the open opportunity and offered his services to Woods. Woods accepted, and Eddie Gilbert was the booker for CWF. The chance to be a booker was all Eddie Gilbert wanted. He had so many ideas that he needed to see become reality. Eddie would also bring in his friend Paul Heyman as an assistant booker and as an on-screen talent. Eddie would bring that wild Memphis sensibility to the show right away, with more violent angles and match stipulations. The Continental Territory was already known for its creative freedom, but with Eddie Gilbert, talent felt encouraged to take it even further, just like Tom Pritchard and Tony Anthony did with the infamous Talk to Tom angle. In April 1988, Tom Pritchard and Tony Anthony created one of the most infamous angles ever aired. After Pritchard claimed a lock of the Dirty White Boy's mullet, Lady Mystic, Tony Anthony's actual wife, came onto the set and told Gordon Solie that she'd like to talk to Tom Pritchett. Mystic took off her sunglasses, revealing a massive black eye that she said was given to her by Dirty White Boy. Eventually, Pritchard comes out to talk to Mystic. She begs for Tom to help her. As she's doing so, she's slowly turning him around. That's when Tony Anthony pounced. Dirty White Boy attacked Pritchard, with Mystic helping out with kicks to the ribs, showing it was all a setup. There was no domestic violence. She wasn't in danger. The only one in danger was Pritchard. Later on in the attack, Anthony handcuffed Pritchard and hung him over the ropes. Pritchard later said he was willing to die for the angle. For years, Eddie Gilbert and Paul Heyman were credited with the angle. Pritchard contends that the idea was all him and Tony Anthony. But this was the kind of creative leeway guys had. This was Continental at its most unhinged, and maybe most desperate. While all of this chaos was unfolding down in Alabama, Ron Fuller was still holding on to the Tennessee side of the Southeastern Territory. So in March of 1988, he launched a brand new promotion, USA Championship Wrestling. On paper, it looks familiar. Fuller leaned heavily on names that fans of the region already knew. You had the Armstrongs, the Mongolian Stomper, Bill Dundee, Buddy Landell, guys who had been staples of the area for years. But he also mixed in talent from outside the immediate southeastern area. Hector Guerrero made appearances, Terry Gordy came through. It was an interesting blend of Tennessee regulars and broader national talent. Gordon Solie even pulls double duty, doing commentary for USA Wrestling alongside Fuller while still working for Continental. The two promotions even used the same production company for their TV tapings, Alabama-based Cross Creek Television Productions. Despite having television, recognizable names, and an experienced promoter at the helm, nothing really happened with USA Championship Wrestling. There were no major angles, no breakout stars, no must-see matches. The wrestling wasn't bad, it just wasn't that great either.
My pleasure to be here as usual, and before we get the program started, I've got a special guest here today, and I want to introduce him. This is one of the Armstrong boys, Brian Armstrong. He's a Marine, as you can tell here. How you doing, Brian? Brian's been here visiting Scott and Brad. I hear Brad's in town and a whole bunch of people, right?
Yes, I have. It's a real pleasure to be here in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's my new hometown, Knoxville, Tennessee. And it's just a pleasure. I came up here to see Scott Super Kick Armstrong, and I was hoping to see him demonstrate that super kick here today on television.
By the end of the summer of 1988, USA Championship Wrestling quietly shut down. Ron Fuller would resurface later that fall, returning to CWF for a handful of matches before retiring in 1989. Around the same time that USA Wrestling folded, Gordon Solie also left CWF. According to Harvey Whippleman, David Woods didn't appreciate Solie coming into town and having a couple of drinks at the Radisson before the tapings with the boys. So Solie pretty much said to hell with it and quit. In the fall of '88, the TV show again underwent a revamp, with the studio elements like the interview area being dropped and Charlie Platt just hosting from ringside. Having Woods as the owner probably seemed like a huge upgrade. They could use the WCOV TV assets to improve their production value. On the surface, it appears like a great move. But some vets like Jeff Jarrett have insinuated that Woods was probably taken for a ride in the deal. And as Woods would say in an interview in 1990, by this point WCOV TV didn't even have money to buy toilet paper. So he wasn't exactly in a position to burn money on Continental. Cost-saving measures went into effect, like marathon TV tapings. The tapings didn't have much action, which fans in the area weren't used to. So as time went on, less and less people showed up. CWF also brought in talent hungry for opportunity, like Brian Lee, The Great Coquina, and Cactus Jack. And Dennis Condrey returns to the territory and gets a big push as the CWF heavyweight champion. But by 1989, the money was gone, and CWF aired their final episode on November 25th, 1989. Many blame Continental's downfall on Ron Fuller's desperate expansion to compete with Vince, Watts, and Crockett. Vince had New York and a vision for national expansion. Watts and the Crockett's were larger territories that were more successful to begin with, so they had a head start in trying to compete with Vince anyway. By the time David Woods purchased the territory, there wasn't much to salvage. The damage was done and no amount of reinvention could fix it. Today, Ron Fuller still owns the footage. Hogan's TV debut, early Paul Heyman, pre-WWF Shawn Michaels, and WWE hasn't been interested in buying it. And that might be the most tragic part of it, because this wasn't just a territory, it was history, and WWE is supposed to be the custodians of wrestling history. I understand why they don't prioritize old footage, but the history of the business is so incredibly important. It all deserves protection. Hopefully someday it'll end up somewhere for proper archiving. And that's the story of Southeastern and Continental Wrestling. The promotion didn't succeed or die overnight. It was worn down by wars, egos, ambition, and a business that was unrecognizable by the end. Robert Fuller has said that Vince McMahon wouldn't have become the success he was if it wasn't for Southeastern giving guys like Hogan, JYD, Orndorff, and others opportunities so early in their careers. Hell, the Fullers created, or at least helped create, the Honky Tonk Man gimmick in 1982.
Television main event. Here it is, Dickie. In the ring from Marietta, Georgia, Bullet Bob Armstrong taking on the latest member of the Midnight Express Incorporated. This is 25% of himself, Honky Tonk Wayne Ferris. I'll tell you what, he had a tremendous, beautiful robe on. He looks great. He's in great condition.
Tons of Southeastern Wrestling, Continental Championship Wrestling, and Continental Wrestling Federation footage is all over YouTube. Just search the name and a year, and you'll find what you want. And as always, you can find a link to my playlist in the description of the video. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by subscribing or tracking me down on social media, either here or here. Share your memories or thoughts about Continental in the comments, and feel free to suggest other promotions for future DCW episodes. I'm Scott from WrestleSpective. Watch wrestling, love wrestling. Thanks for watching.